Senator from Oklahoma.
Mr. President, once more I'm coming to this floor to talk about the basic rules of the Senate and how we actually get on legislation. We've spent all of this week on 4 district court judicial nominations, the entire week. No legislation, because we can't get on legislation. In 2013, we were in a similar situation to this. The minority party, at that point being the Republicans, were slowing down the process in the Senate on nominations to the Democratic Party, at that point the majority. And so Republicans and Democrats sat down together and said, this is a problem. We cannot get to legislation. And Republicans and Democrats together, with 70-plus votes, made a 2-year rule change in the Senate in the 113th Congress. It was a simple rule change. 2 hours of debate for a district court judge, 8 hours of debate for just about everybody else, 30 hours of debate for circuit court, Supreme Court, and cabinet nominations. It was a bipartisan agreement that worked very well for that 2-year time period. And then at the end of that 2-year time period, it had a sunset on it and it expired. The hope was we would relearn how to be able to do this. Now, I wasn't here in the Senate at that time, but I've talked to multiple people about that process. What happened instead was, during the first year of that, there continued to be ongoing frustration, and so my Democratic colleagues used what's called affectionately the nuclear option, to be able to change the rules of the Senate to say that they can bring individuals with only 51 votes, not 60, and then they used the rule on top of that they had changed to bring people at greater speed, which they did, and for the rest of the next year used it that way. We now come to this time period. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about in the frustration of this. Let me go back and try to confirm my number to make sure that I get it right for all the Senate history here. From 1967 until 2012, there were 46 cloture votes in vote. That means they requested a cloture vote and it went all the way to be a vote. 46 of those on judges and executive branch from 1967 to 2012. Last year, there were 46 cloture votes in this body just in 1 year. What was from 1967 to 2012 before the total number, Democrats did to Republicans in 1 year last year. The statement keeps coming up over and over again. Why can't we get on legislation? Because each day is full with dead time debating nominations like what passed today unanimously in the Senate, but we had to have cloture time set aside for it. This has got to be fixed. The rules of the Senate are set by the senators. In 2013, the senators stood up and said, this has to stop, and fixed it. I am recommending again that the Senate once again implement the same rule that Democrats led Republicans to do in 2013, now in this year, and instead of doing it for one Congress, make it the rule. If it was a good idea for Democrats in 2013 and 14, why is it not a good idea for Republicans and Democrats now? That simple rule is, when we can't agree on a candidate, we would only have 2 hours of debate on a district judge. This week, remembering for the entire week, it took the whole week to do 4 of them. We could do 2 hours of debate for each one if it's a district court judge, 8 hours for just about everybody else, or 30 hours of debate, Supreme Court, Circuit Court, and cabinet level nominations. You would think that that would be a slam dunk. So far, it has not been. For some reason, my Democratic colleagues say that rule was good for us, but it's not good for you. And it's not good for the future of the Senate. I believe that it is. That it was a fair rule then, it's a fair rule now. Enough debating about the rules of the Senate. Let's get on to the business of the Senate and to actually do what the American people sent us here to do. Interestingly enough, there's also a very obscure rule in the Senate called Rule 31, that if at the end of a year there are still nominations that are pending out there, that those nominations would have to be returned to the White House and they'd have to start all over again. Now, the Senate can agree by unanimous consent to say, okay, we understand these are all in process, by unanimous consent, just agree to those things and to be able to hold them on the calendar. Let me give you an example of that. Under President Bill Clinton, at the end of his first year, there were only 13 of his nominations that were sent back to the White House. After the end of George W. Bush's first term, only 2 nominations were returned back to the White House. After President Obama's first term, only 8 were sent back to the White House. After President Trump's first term, 90 were sent back. Let me review again. Bill Clinton, 13. George Bush, 2. President Obama, 8. President Trump, 90. I don't think my Democratic colleagues understand that they're continuing to amp up the volume of obstruction, saying someone's obstructed us in the past, so we're going to do it 10 times to you. Understanding, well, all that leads to is the next time Republicans are in the minority, we do it 10 times again, and it makes this worse. There is a way to fix this. We should come to that mutual agreement. We should resolve the rules of the Senate. We've got to get onto budget. We've got to get onto children's health insurance program. We've got to get onto intelligence issues. We've got to get onto immigration. We've got to get onto infrastructure. We've got to get onto a lot of other things, but we're stuck debating people that should be an easy one for us. I'm recommending to this body what my folks used to say to me: what was good for the goose should be good for the gander. If it was a great rule when Democrats were in the majority, it should be a great rule when Republicans were a majority. Let's just take clean, fair rules, apply it to everyone. Let's move on with the nomination process, and let's get back to the business of doing legislation so we can get this resolved. With that, Mr. President, I would yield the floor.